to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman. I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is a guest from Egypt, Senator Mohamed Farid, who is the deputy chairman on the Committee on Human Rights and Social Solidarity, and he is also the co-founder of the Liberal Club of Cairo, and we'll hear a little bit more about what that means in a minute. Today we'll be discussing the article he co-wrote with an Egyptian journalist, Mohamed Maher, about China's growing relationship with Egypt and what that means. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us. Before we delve into the depths of this interesting topic, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your role on this committee, and about the Liberal Club you have co-founded and what it does?
Thank you for having me. I'm the deputy chairman for the Committee on Human Rights and Social Solidarity in the Egyptian Senate, and the committee focuses generally on the broader issues of human rights, with its all holistic, inclusive, interconnected rights, from the political rights to the social, economic, cultural rights, civic rights, the whole spectrum of the human rights, and also the social solidarity, and by that we mean the social safety networks, the subsidy programs, the protection for the most vulnerable and the poorest in the society. So it's a bit broad mandate for the committee, and I'm honored to be the deputy chairman for this committee. I was appointed in the Egyptian Senate in the year 2020 and October 2020. The Egyptian Senate consists of 300 members. 2/3 of them are elected, 1/3 is appointed. Before being appointed in the Senate, I used to be the head of Youth Wing, deputy chairperson for the Economic Committee in a political party. It's a classical liberal party. After that, I co-founded with a group of my friends something we call the Liberal Club of Cairo, which is a center-right classical liberal think tank. We focus on promoting and putting forward proposals and alternatives with the embedding in it the values of liberty and freedom. And our core focus on three things: life, liberty, and property. And we believe these three things should be preserved, should be conserved, should be developed and cherished. And this is the foundation for all the work that we're doing, all the work that I do in the Senate. And also I have a colleague of mine, a co-founder, who is also a member of the House of Representatives. So in a sense, this small group of people in the Liberal Club have two members of the parliament, me in the Senate, my colleague and co-founder in the House.
You have no idea how I'm excited to hear about this, because classical liberalism is at the foundation of the United States, and it used to be a very important economic and political pillar of the US foundational philosophy. Unfortunately, in recent decades, it has been erased by various movements and simply lack of proper education. But I think conversations such as this one from around the world will be a good stimulus to re-inspire and reignite the interest in this important ideas. So getting back to your article, and that I think is very much a concern for everyone around the world, not just in Egypt, because of, first of all, on the one hand, China's growing influence overall, on the other hand, on Egypt's important and growing role in Africa, in global economic spheres. And in light of the various crises that have hit the international community in the past couple of years, starting with the pandemic, this intersection of these different actors and stakeholders, they can have global impact, not just local and regional impact. And the important premise in the article is that a lot of it goes well beyond the economic sphere, which in itself is, could be a separate topic for the conversation. Now, I think before we go into these issues, how China's involvement with Egypt is starting to expand to other areas, let's start with discussing this economic relationship first, just to give our audiences a brief idea of what's happening, how it all got started, why and how has China become a major player in Egypt. It seems to be a relatively recent development, comparatively speaking.
Relatively speaking, you are right, yet the political ties between Egypt and the People's Republic of China is very old, back to the very first days of the foundation of the People's Republic of China. Yet the economic and political ties has evolved rapidly over the past few years, namely after President Xi Jinping took the office, and as he came in office, and of course issued his grandiose plan of the Belt and Road Initiative, and tried to include countries in that huge project. Egypt was one of the countries. Since then, the snowball effect had per se moved on forward. Of course, the situation or the relations now, it's beyond the economic or the bilateral trade. A lot of activities taking place on the cultural level. I mean, even in the late 2000s, China established the Confucius Institute in Egypt and several universities to be a spearhead, per se, to spread the Chinese language, the Chinese propaganda, and to win the hearts and mind of the young people and young students. On the cultural level, also, a lot of training programs taking place between government officials, executives, and even political parties. Also, a lot of scholarships to Chinese universities being generously spread and published to attract younger people to study in China. And for many people, this is a very good opportunity for them to seek postgraduate studies, and they perceive China as a friend, as another country in the global south, standing for the imperialism, and the white man dictation against the poor nations, and the rest of the propaganda book of the Chinese. Of course, over and above that, the economic relations. In the past few years, there was a lot of increase in the Chinese direct investments in Egypt. A lot of the bilateral trade volumes has increased tremendously. And the most concerning is also the debt. China holds around 5% of Egypt's external debt. China is the third largest bilateral creditor to Egypt. So if you look at it in that view, not only focusing on the economic cooperation or the cultural cooperation and even political. I mean, the Chinese embassy in Egypt is very active in communicating with political parties, all the political parties.
I am losing
It
you
doesn't
a
matter
little
if
bit.
they are from the
Sorry.
right, from everywhere. They communicate them actively. Yes. Okay. Where did it stop? Hello?
If you could just repeat the last couple of sentences.
Okay. Okay. So it's not only political. Sorry, it's not only economic relations or cultural relations, but also political relations. If you look at the activity of the Chinese embassy in Egypt, they are very active in communicating effectively with the Egyptian political parties, whether these parties are from the left or from the right, socialist or capitalist, according to the Chinese term. They don't differentiate. They just communicate effectively and in a very friendly way with everyone. They invite them for visits to China. They keep actively inviting them for the major events taking place, like the annual parties convention in China or conference in China. And the visits are very well organized. They meet the people with a very warm welcoming. They facilitate meetings with counterparts in China, high-level officials in China, and so on and so forth. Looking on the other side at, for example, the Americans dealing with the Egyptian political parties, for example, or politicians, the American lawmakers, usually they don't interact with their counterparts in Egypt. They just visit the government officials. Rarely they meet with the parliament members of the parliament or the political parties, unlike the Chinese do. And that's how the Chinese spread their influence to the political sphere. And they started to have this great perception of cooperation with China, and they perceive China as a friend and an ally, despite the harmful practices China do and impact Egypt.
So what we are hearing right now is not only is there a general vacuum of power of the US presence, but that despite the conventional wisdom that the fault on this issue lies with the executive branch, with the presidents, the last few of whom have not been either have been uninvolved in Egypt or hostile with Egypt. We are also seeing that on the congressional side, where typically some of these relationships may not be as far-reaching, but are also important, there also has not been the sort of reciprocity and engagement which could have, at the very least, balanced out the effort by Beijing. But what I'm hearing is also something radically different that also has become conventional wisdom about China's influence operations abroad, which is that it relies almost entirely on economic engagement and debt trap diplomacy to enter countries, that it creates economic incentives for wooing away traditional US allies or otherwise building its network just through financial means, sometimes detrimental to the country's long-term economic agenda. What we're hearing now is that China has adopted a holistic multilateral approach, which also involves cultural diplomacy, information warfare and propaganda, and very deep and meaningful political engagement. Its diplomats are trained in Arabic. They are culturally aware, and many of them spend years in Egypt and are certainly aware of the nuances of the political diversity and situation inside the country as well, which is not the same for U.S. diplomats who are not always professional. They are sometimes political appointees and not career diplomats, and the career diplomats are frequently rotated between countries and don't also always know the language. So given this complex picture, let's go back to Egypt itself and look at how that is serving Egypt right now, whether it's serving the purpose, because some of these elements are still have not really been fully resolved. The debt trap diplomacy is an element that is still present, although it is now being supplemented by other important factors. Egypt has been going through an economic crisis. So have many other countries affected by the war in Ukraine, by the impact of the pandemic, by the energy crisis around the world, Egypt is a very highly agricultural country that has suffered also the impact of local conflicts with the over GRD, with the Ethiopia, and so on and so forth. My understanding that in previous years, Egypt would rely highly, first of all, on the consistent U.S. humanitarian assistance, and second, also on investments from Gulf states. But China has now playing an increasingly significant role on par with these countries. A recent number that I've heard thrown out was something along the lines of billions of dollars in a single major investment. What was the nature of that agreement? What is China getting out of it, and how can Egypt protect its interests from over-dependency on traditional Chinese model of bringing countries into a dependence in its infrastructure and then essentially taking control of it if they are unable to pay back the loans? Can you tell us a little bit?
Well, I totally agree with what you've mentioned. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you with what you just said. And having said that, Egypt trying always to diversify and to balance its foreign relation with other countries, but still in times of crisis, like in times of instability, like the last decade that Egypt had been through, it's important to depend on allies. Despite the harmful impact of the Ethiopian dam, as you mentioned, and it was the great role for China in financing and helping this dam to be built, and the Chinese propaganda and their active engagement in Egypt had subdued these facts, and despite the role of the United States in trying to mediate and help in resolving this conflict, still the conventional wisdom say that it's the Ethiopian dam is a conspiracy done by the United States and Israel and their allies, and no one talks about the disruptive Chinese rule. And this is a clear example of the information war that the Chinese are operating. Adding to that, when it comes to the economic cooperation, the Chinese, we are all aware of the Chinese debt trap. But again, they come, they give you cheap money with no question asked, and with all the opaque conditions. They don't demand any transparency. They quite the opposite. Sometimes they put non-disclosure clauses in the agreements, The loan agreements stays away from the public eye, you know. On the contrary, what happened when you go for a loan from the United States or an advanced country, there must be some measures of transparency, of course, the human rights, and now the ESG. So China became a good resort to, or a lender to go to, you know. Right now, as I mentioned, that China is the third bilateral creditor for Egypt. It holds about $8 billion of debt to Egypt, and this is the last year figures. This is the most, I mean, this is the most updated figure that is published by the Central Bank of Egypt, but I believe maybe this amount is a bit more than that. China and of course, due to the nature of the Chinese model, it's common economy, so they go and order their companies, which is politically affiliated or partially or totally owned by the CCP, to go do investments in Egypt, you know, or to go invest in some area. And a clear example for that, there is a Chinese industrial zone in the Suez Canal development zone, industrial zone. And despite they have this industrial zone, this didn't stop the Chinese from using their classic tricks on abusing the advantages they have. So, for example, there is a famous case for fiberglass factories, Chinese fiberglass factories that are established in Egypt in the Chinese zone, and they use the advantage of the trade between Egypt and EU, the free trade between Egypt and EU, and they sent fiberglass as made in Egypt, but of course with dumping prices. So there have been some cases of fighting the Egyptian companies for dumping, you know, in the EU. So this is one of the examples of the malpractices that the Chinese are doing. It's really important bring the bills about these practices, and it's really important to work on opening the market for other investors from other countries, for the private sector to be able to come and have investments in Egypt. This is one of the things that we've been working on, whether throughout the parliament or as advisory or as advocacy or throughout our analysis in the Liberal Club. And we see it crucial and important to open up the market, to increase the competitiveness, to be able to break the monopoly per se. It's not a monopoly, but the monopoly or the increasing influence of China on the economic level, on the political level, and the information war. I believe I mean, we should speak out about that. And I thank you for having me, for example, at your show, to talk about it, to let the people know about such practices, you know, because again, the Chinese work very clever and very hard to infiltrate the areas and establish spearheads in different areas. Egypt is a key country, and it has a great potential when it comes, for example, to trade in Africa, to be the gate to Europe, and a lot of advantages here in Egypt, you know, even as a market. But leaving the country for the Chinese, it's very damaging, not only for the Egyptians, but for all the allies of Egypt and for the United States directly, for the United States and its allies.
Before the Chinese economic presence became such a big discussion point, there was a concern by Western investors about the military's involvement in Egyptian economy, the fact that it was not privatizing and liberalizing quickly enough, and that stronghold by the military was stealing of that competitiveness. What, in your opinion, is the relationship between this Chinese now increasing control of Egyptian economy, the military presence? Are they in conflict with each other? Are they complementing each other? Has the military stronghold allowed China to enter more? What is the status, and how can both of these conflicting factors be sufficiently subdued that Western investors can feel free to come in and do business with Egyptian companies?
Well, I agree with you. There is a lot of state intervention in the market, and by the state, I mean all the institutions, only the military, and right now it's an open discussion, open debate, about the role of the state in the Egyptian economy. For us, the Liberal Club, and for me in the Senate over the years, I've been talking and advocating for the government to reduce its or the state intervention to reduce its intervention and to start doing the investment and allow the private sector to work. For the Chinese, as you know, the majority or the most of the, if not all the Chinese companies are affiliated with the CCP. So the Chinese Communist Party give them the order to go do investment, and they go that. So for them, it's not a problem. There is no problem to have a government intervention in the market or not. They stay there and they work there, and they can live with that. But because they're backed by this communist party, in the private sector from the West or even for the local businesses, it will be difficult, of course, to compete with the state for uncountable reasons. So right now, it's been publicly criticized, publicly debated, the role of the state. Of course, as also probably the silver lining in the current economic crisis, the people start to talk and report publicly and debate the role of the state in the market. I believe with there is a great realization among everyone, and by everyone I mean whether the government, the makers, the investors, even the laymen, about the impact of the government intervention in the economy, on the state intervention in the economy. A few months ago, the government of Egypt issued something called the state ownership document, the state policy ownership document, which is a document saying or defining the role of the state economy and policies with to de-invest in several sectors. Yet it needs to be applied. Yet to see how this gonna happen, a lot of action in that field from our side. We encourage the government, we talk with them, and we put policies, proposals to put this document into action, at least to announce a clear time frame for the investment, a clear plan for that, and we keep pushing and pursuing for that. Yes, we are a minority, but we keep working on that. This is
And which sectors of the economy, which industries are most dominated either by state or by Chinese involvement?
well, basically the construction now. There are the fiberglass, some chemicals. Few weeks ago, there was a memorandum of understanding between the Chinese and the government of Egypt to start investing in the green hydrogen. So energy also one of the sectors that are telecommunications, and this is, I believe, this is a great threat. We all see the involvement of Huawei and other Chinese companies and their affiliation with the CCP. Also, the threats for the privacy for the citizens and the use of this technology and developing this technology in other countries out of China, especially in Africa and Middle East, and learning from this experience to use it back in China in human rights violations and abusing its citizens.
One of the concerns from the U.S. perspective is that military programs frequently rely on civilian infrastructure, such as telecommunications, cyber, and so forth, for support in operations. And cyber and telecoms have been part of the Belt and Road Initiative by China around the world, not just roads, bridges, ports and airports, the traditional physical infrastructural projects, but also these communication and cyber structures. And there's a concern that China is looking past even building a surveillance state in Egypt or whatever. We're not talking about simply human rights violations for their own sake, but the fact that it's looking to create a military footprint for its own intelligence and other operations in the region through Africa, through Egypt, and in the East. How valid are these concerns?
Well, when it comes to the military activities, no, it's not really valid because this is an issue of high sensitivity here in Egypt, and nobody, I mean, literally nobody, the government or the common people would accept such a thing, So this is a no. This is a huge red line, when it comes to military intervention or military or even cyber warfare, footprint in Egypt. So this is totally refuted and disputed, and yet I understand and we witness in some situations where the US fleet is harboring, and go there for exercises. So yes, I believe it's a legitimate concern, but when it comes to Egypt, it's not the case.
I'm going to ask something a little bit provocative. Bear with me for a moment while I set up the question for the audience who may not be aware of the development. But my question is not what you may think initially what it's going to be. Recently, President Sisi paid a high-level visit to Saudi Arabia, where, as it was reported in the Western media, and I'm being very careful with my use of words because that reporting is also not always complete or accurate, which is why I'm phrasing it that way. It was said that the Saudis denied further investments without particular reforms, which included changing officials in charge of the economy, instituting measures devaluing the Egyptian pound, and so forth. Now, I don't know how, first of all, whether the reporting is even accurate and if that was the nature of the discussions. If there is anything to be corrected, please do let me know, because I do prefer to be operating on the basis of accurate information before asking anything else. If the general gist is correct, my question is not so much about whether it's valid or not valid and whether Saudis have any right to make such demands, because hey, they're funders, they can ask for anything and you can feel free to disagree. My question about China's role is in all of this, because on the one hand, Saudi is one of the main funders of Egyptian, the main investors into Egyptian economy. And this denial for the funding opens the doors for China to step in, whether or not they agree with Saudi assessments of what needs to be changed. They may wish to invest for their own measures. So why would Saudi Arabia not take that into consideration? Or if they are in fact taking it into consideration, is it a concern that China is brokering these agreements with Saudi in various countries in the region, and therefore making an impact on Saudi relations with other countries by virtue of playing that diplomatic role? Are they having outsized influence on Saudi and other countries' environment?
The voice have been breaking for the last few seconds. Can you repeat the last 3-4 sentences? I'm sorry, Irina, the voice is breaking.
Sure, absolutely. Basically, my question is less about whether, Saudi assessment of what needs to be changed is correct or not, because from my perspective, it doesn't really matter. I think the bigger question here is what role is China playing in this calculus? Do you think they are influencing Saudi perception of what needs to be done because of their own political role in the Middle East, because of the important role as a power broker, as a diplomatic engagement, as an economic factor in Saudi? Do you think they are having an impact on Saudi-Egyptian investment relations in that aspect? Do you think they are influencing the way Saudis are perceiving their investments in Egypt, and basically having a behind-the-scenes political impact on these relations?
First of all, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and UAE and other Gulf countries are important partners for Egypt, whether on political level or in economic level. The Arab countries owns 26%, almost 26% of Egypt external debt, and they are the second largest creditor for Egypt after the multilateral institutions. So this gives you an idea of how large and deep and important these relations are. I read the reports as you read it, and I totally understand that any investor, any creditor would like to guarantee their money and like to guarantee a return on their investments. How it's said, how it's perceived, how it's handled, these details I have no idea about it, but it was clearly that the Minister of Finance, the Saudi Minister of Spain, is stated about that, the age of the free money or support without questions is gone, and it's a legitimate concern and totally understandable. Yet I don't think that the Chinese have a great role in influencing that. On the contrary, I believe that the Chinese would benefit from that, and it's quite the opposite. I mean, when they see something like that, they can jump into it. I believe that Egypt clearly in economic crisis, and how I perceive it, that as earlier I told you, there's a silver lining in every cloud, and probably the silver lining is to take serious measures in opening up the market and increase the competitiveness and reduce the state footprint in the market. Of course, this couldn't happen overnight. It's impossible to happen overnight, and there are a lot of things on stake and a lot of different interests in a sense. So it's a very large, a very complicated process, but you need to start breaking on it. And not only that, but you need to do a lot of delicate management for that process, because if you just reinvest or went out from one sector, for example, you will create a vacuum. You need to first do a reform for the investment climate. You have to increase the competitiveness of that sector. You have to start to attract other investors. You have to enable private sector to be able to replace the existing state-owned enterprises or the state intervention in that sector. So it has delicate, yet serious and yet clear process in order not to create vacuum. And in such crisis, it created a vacuum. There are over 100 million, 104 million people in Egypt. So it's a ticking bomb. So it's just happened overnight. But at least you have to get a plan and you have to agree with it. One other thing that when Egypt went to the IMF earlier this year, and they reached earlier last year, and they reached a deal by the end of 2022. Part of the deal was securing extra finance by regional creditors and investors, namely the Gulf states. So this means that they are partners and they are involved in the process of the reform. So be more open to its partners, and yet the partners have to understand the gravity of the situation in Egypt and understand that things doesn't happen overnight. But I believe if a clear plan was announced with a proper applicable procedures and measures and time frame, I think this would resolve the situation.
Among all these developments, I'm curious about the role of the US, because I've heard a lot of statements from the administration and from Congress about, first of all, about military sales of military technology, and also about some humanitarian issues and occasional statements about human rights, this and that. I have not heard much about the economy, about any joint US-Egyptian projects, about any plans for agricultural kind of localized agricultural investment. In fact, since the US pledged $500 million for climate change reparations, I haven't heard anything about any specifics of how that would be worked out in and within Egypt, whether any of that can be used to offset the impact of the war in Ukraine on the agricultural disruptions, fertilizers, price of wheat, and so forth. How is that playing out in practice? Is there any deeper, mid-level diplomatic and official engagement, or is this all just talk, and has there been not much happening?
Well, this is one of the problems. We suffer a lot from the Russian invasion to Ukraine. It's insane. If you look at it like that, Putin decided overnight to invade neighboring countries, and all of a sudden, an Egyptian children suffer from malnutrition and high food prices, and they cannot afford the proper nutrition. It's really insane if you look at that level. But this is how it is. and we have impacted in a very negative way by the Russian invasion. The global inflation for food prices is killing the people here. I mean, the locally the inflation reached over 40% last month. Now, so to be curbed a little bit, but looking at food prices month to month, annually, sorry, inflation last month. This impact on a country, the majority of its people are poor, over 32%, according to the government, are on the poverty line, and that was in the year 2019. That was pre-pandemic, pre-invasion, pre-global inflation. So the situation is very tough. Having said that, one of the other things that I don't understand why there is no serious action about it is the PGII initiative that was launched by the United States and its partners last year to be able to provide global infrastructure and investments with higher quality and to help countries that have been falling in the grip of China to get out of that grip and offer the people better quality infrastructure and better growth opportunities. And I'm very frustrated to see how slowly this initiative is going and how little it has in Egypt.
And are there any dialogues, discussions on other related matters, whether kind of agriculture projects, because to kind of offset the limits of what's happening with wheat imports, or to kind of create more of the local importation initiatives from maybe in Africa or anything else?
Irina, sorry, Irina, I lost you. It's really breaking. The last question, I couldn't hear it. Can you repeat? I'm awfully sorry. I have a horrible connection here.
So besides
Can you repeat?
Besides that initiative that you just described, has there been any other attempted action by the United States in terms of engaging with the agriculture or with any other sector, or has there been any follow-up even on the climate change reparations pledge? Have we seen any influx of money from that?
None of I'm aware of.
Well, that is very interesting to know, because it certainly made a lot of press when it happened, but since then I have not heard anything, and I've been following all of this relatively closely. So I kind of want to get back more to China now and to discuss some of the other issues you brought up in your article, which is, while this economic component has been obviously very troubling and important, no less incredulous to me is the fact that China is operating its Confucius institutes without limitation, and it's true not just for Egypt but for many other countries. I understand the advantages from the perspective of the students, but is there any concern in the government about the indoctrination of these students and the fact that China is essentially using its initiatives as an intelligence operation? Has there been any?
I don't know. I don't think there is a concern about that, but I don't think that they are doing it that bluntly here in Egypt.
There's no concern that these students who benefit from these initiatives are being turned into agents of influence for China in politics, in business sphere, in culture that would later push Chinese interests even, without any concern?
Well, I believe it's not as bluntly and as harsh as it as you think. But the Chinese play it in a very modest and soft way. They start to spread. They play the information war. They start to spread propaganda. They start to create sympathizers for them. They start to show the people the great Chinese example and how Chinese policies and is very peaceful and very pacifist, and how they are resisting the imperialism and what I'm trying to find the proper word, the American leadership for the world, who's taking the world into a doomed path, and the rest of the propaganda. So they are successful in that. And many people, whether in whatever sector you can think, they believe that. And they are successful in winning the minds and hearts of the people. And adding to that, there are a lot of economic interests in the stake, a lot of business people, especially small and medium businessmen, who trade with China, so a lot of stakes. So they played the game in a very smart way, and they create sympathy, and this is reflected in the polls. And people perceive China as a friend and as a ally, while the United States role, it's important and everything, but they are not as friendly and not as friends as China. And the general sentiment that they would trust China. And I believe this is really dangerous. And I believe it has a moral hazard, because if you look at the CCP and find that you have no problem with the Communist Party of China and the authoritarian regime and systematic abuse for every imaginable right for its citizen, and you start to normalize that and find it as a great successful example, and how they left millions of people out of poverty. If you normalize that and people start to accept it, there is a huge moral hazard that people will accept authoritarianism and dictatorship and intervention in the rights, and they will even forget the rights and believe it's a privilege per se. And this is really dangerous thing if you're talking about democracy, liberty, and human rights. And one of the things that I believe that the United States and our friends in the West don't really get it, that in Egypt and many countries in the Middle East, we don't have this democratic tradition. We don't have this deep appreciation and understanding of human rights. Until now, people perceive human rights as privileges, as a Western agenda. And the Chinese would love, and they ramp up on that. They keep pursuing and pushing in that side, and this is extremely dangerous if we're talking about the future. And if you'd like to spread democracy, human rights, liberty, you have to start by raising awareness. You have to start by setting the example. You have to understand the local context and start to work on that. These values are extremely important, and they are the foundation for every free society, and they are the foundation for progress, for prosperity. And if you tackle it in the wrong way, if you allow China to spread its influence, soft power, and the information war and the propaganda, you will end up with people accepting the abuse and accepting the authoritarianism and lack of tolerance and lack of pluralism. Then the Chinese model as a successful model, as an efficient model.
Well, the one counter argument to that, from just taking the pragmatic efficiency argument, is that it's really not efficient, because a lot of Chinese so-called lifting people out of poverty was dependent on two factors. First, the United States and its imports of technology of its people, companies, know-how, and outsourcing of jobs, which doesn't need to happen. And the other issue is from intellectual property theft, which produces inferior products and stifles local innovation efforts. And when we talk about,
you're totally right. You and I know that. I'm sorry for
it's actually much more damaging to Egypt than it is to the United States, because China has no interest in lifting Egyptians out of poverty, because then they will no longer need China. They can produce their own things. They can build their own infrastructure. They want to create an economic kind of model where Egyptians are dependent on Chinese products as well, and cannot innovate on their own. And whatever innovations
yes,
they do
you
develop,
and I know that.
That is the problem. That I think this kind of argument, I think, will be more effective than human rights when trying to counter this Chinese propaganda. They do not actually benefit population or their pockets. And frankly, giving big loans to the government does not automatically translate into jobs, into security, or into food on the table.
Totally right, totally agree. But this is you and me discussing that. I know this argument by heart. But if you look at the Chinese propaganda, especially at the property rights issue, which is, I believe, it's crucial, and it's a foundation for any prosperity, for any progress, for any innovation. What the Chinese said, especially at the pandemic time, they said that the West, the United States, refuse to help the people by lifting the property rights for vaccination. And the United States and their allies, they ramped up millions of dozens of doses of vaccine, and now it's expiring, and they deprive millions of people in the global south and the poor people. And that this is the Chinese propaganda, and this is what they say, and sadly, millions of people believe that. And this is why the information war is really important. The counter propaganda is really important. So it's about the information war. It's about understanding the local context and starting to realize how it works, what are the situation, and then you can reach the message. As I mentioned, the Chinese, for example, during the pandemic that had been saying, see, the property rights in the United States and the West have refused to lift the property rights over vaccine, and this deprived millions of people of affordable vaccine. Well, and doses of vaccination to the poor countries all over the world, so on and so forth. And when after that, the research say, see, the reach north to the United States and the West had wrapped up millions of unneeded doses of vaccine, and now it's expiring, depriving the poor people from the vaccine and allowing them to lose their lives. While nobody talks about the mismanagement of the CCTOIP and the denial lying about the outbreak of the pandemic and the influence of the World Health Organization into that, and all the horrible events that took place during the outbreak of the pandemic. Until now, also they refuse to allow people to investigate the origin of the pandemic. So this is how they play.
As I see it, there's right now a huge disconnect between the problems the international community and the US in particular is facing from countries like China and their ramped up information warfare and messaging capabilities, and diplomatic official understanding of local context in target countries in general, and in Egypt in particular, and capabilities, current capacity for countering that sort of messaging and developing anything. We are at a very rudimentary stage with a very poorly equipped government apparatus for that purpose. We had those capabilities during the Cold War. We specialized in that and we achieved some level of success. But since the fall of the Soviet Union, this has been relegated to the back burner until these skills have been lost and a completely different mindset set in with people not knowing languages, local cultures, understanding mentalities of different people, and seeing everything through a very ideologically US-centric context, which does not work when you're fighting information wars. So I think this is a very serious issue you're bringing up. I think it's well worth considering, and I think that the private sector today may be better equipped to be developing that sort of counter messaging than the US government, or frankly any other government. But I think it is most certainly should be prioritized, because the problems are not going to go away quickly, and US influence is being pushed out from everywhere and limited and minimized, and I don't see anyone fighting back. But that also brings us to an issue that goes hand in hand with information war, which is this political engagement that we mentioned at the start of our conversation. The fact that the US has not been proactive in bringing Egyptian lawmakers in identifying potential partners that could be helpful in making these conversations. As a matter of fact, as far as I see, with the exception of a couple of lobbying companies hired locally in the United States, whose success I have not seen, other than maybe some visits and photo ops, which would have probably happened even without their involvement, given that they are official state visits. My question is, what can there be, given that some of these lawmakers simply have no idea that this is even a possibility or that it's needed, that there's no centralized coordination among all these offices and agendas? Can there be an initiative by the Egyptians to kind of start the process with the Americans and then kind of push for reciprocity or suggest it directly? I don't think it's the issue of people being close-minded. I think it's the issue of them not even knowing that it's a possibility or that there is interest.
Well, you know, it takes two to tango. So having an initiative by the Egyptians, it won't work solely. It has to go hand in hand with willingness and awareness and initiative from the American side. I believe the think tanks can facilitate something like that. You know, a lot of think tanks in both countries can do that. You know, also of course embassies in both countries. But you know, I have, as you mentioned earlier, you know, about the private sector role, you know, and how they're more efficient. I believe the private sector is more efficient than any government anywhere, and taking the initiatives, from think tanks, from private sector can be more efficient than relying on bureaucrats. With all due respect to them, of course, but I believe talking about efficiency, it should be done like that. And one other thing, it's really funny because we talk about the importance of democracy and how democracy matters and how it should counter authoritarianism. Sorry for the English, but still, what happens that when politicians and lawmakers, they don't meet with their counterparts, you just encourage or empower the executive branch over the legislative branch by the end of the day. So you end up, if you boil it down, you end up doing something similar to what Chinese doing, because the Chinese, but even the Chinese learned the lesson, and though they are an authoritarian regime, and though they have the CCP, they actively engage with the political parties, as well as they actively engaging with the government. So you're doing harm to the development of a democratic tradition. You're doing harm in building up democracy or developing it forward by just neglecting the legislative branches or don't meet with the counterparts properly or trying to reach a common understanding.
You just made a very important point, which I'm not sure that US or many other people think about, because people talk about exportation of democracy as if it's a product that you put in a package and you send, and somebody on the other side opens the package, democracy comes out, and you just put it on like a t-shirt. But building democracy or engaging in democracy is a process. It's a process of institutional building, education, discussion, political discussions. What I'm not seeing US doing around the world is actually engaging. There's a couple of institutes, the National Democratic Institute and their Republican counterpart, by the way, they have nothing to do with the political parties, and frankly, they don't really, there's not much a difference between them as far as I know. But besides these, election-focused initiatives, I have not seen much best practice sharing focus on high level among willing participants from various countries in the US. I have seen a lot of talk. I have heard a lot of statements from the State Department, lectures, finger wagging on TV, and a lot of one-sided resolutions from Congress. What I have not seen is bringing people for working sessions to discuss the process of going there, organizing meetings and small groups and training sessions, and this sort of institutionalized relationship building that could create very focused, very concrete assessments and initiatives that could propel specific things forward instead of just talking about big ideas and philosophy that leads to nothing but mutual frustration. So that is definitely something that I think could be interesting. The only issue is bringing together the right people from both groups and keeping it small and manageable, and not just with overly lofty initial ambitions. But I think if there is a list of concerns, interests, and discussions, and whether on the political process and strengthening institutions or on substantive issues, healthcare, education, anything else, agriculture or specific industries, economy, things like that, that also I think can be discussed and should be discussed, and there should be a lot more dynamic between US and her allies, for sure. How do you see that happening? How do you perceive that process on your side?
Well, actually, there is a foundation for that. Many programs that taking place for exchange throughout the State Department and the U.S. Embassy. We need to ramp up on that and to increase it. For example, one of the great programs is the IVLP. This is the International Visitor Leadership Program. It's an amazing program, and it gives the people who participate in it a true understanding of the nature of the issues in the United States, and they give them the exposure for what's happening in the United States, and also with other participants from all over the world. This is, for example, a very good example for a cooperation program. Scholarships is also important, and increasing the amount of it is important. Economic cooperation is crucial. Education, cultural cooperation. There are foundations for that, but what I believe that these should be increased and ramped up, and try to compete, not to compete, but to beat the Chinese influence in Egypt, because still, as we were talking, it's about the moral hazard of normalizing the authoritarianism, and the moral hazard of seeing an authoritarian regime as an efficient regime, and buying up the propaganda and disregard the facts, and this is really really dangerous thing. So simply, if we believe in strong and vital partnership between Egypt and the United States, we should stand for this partnership, and we should walk the walk and talk the talk.
Thank you so much for your insights and your comments into this important topic. There is a reason to be concerned about China's growing involvement in Egypt. It's growing way past the well-familiar economic paths. It's expanding into the cultural sphere, into information sphere, and information dominance into the political sphere. And it's only a matter of time before China entrenches its positions in Egypt sufficiently that fighting back is going to become very difficult. The good news is China is not an all-powerful, flawless country with no problems. It's got its own economic problems. Its positions in information warfare are flawed because they're based on false premises, deception, and manipulation. And it's suffering from many problems that people, upon close examination, would find very off-putting. The lack of messaging by the US, by other Western countries, the vacuum of power, the failure to follow up on promises, on engagements, on announced programs, that's the real issue here. It's the lack of political will rather than China's hegemonic ambitions that are causing, that allowing China to come in. I think most people would rather be dealing with others. China's problems and their problematic approaches are well known by now. And the good news, thanks to conversations such as this one, we can re-examine things that have worked in the past, various openings for greater engagements. And the way to fight China is not just by focusing on China, it's by focusing on having and building good, positive, strong relations that last. And I think that's the most important takeaway we can have here. And I think we already have a foundation, and I think we can start with small things and hopefully see the momentum pick up over time. Thank you so much to Senator Farid for joining us today. For those watching the program, this was, as always, Irina with the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Thank you for watching us today. We'll be back again next week, same time, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. And please join us then. Thank you so much again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.